Actually, I lived here for 10 years, and my wife was the editor of the LA Times in Orange County. I was sentenced here for 10 years. And so I got stuck somewhere around, coming in past Costa Mesa. I thought I'd never do this again. And the reason I wanted to be here is I do think that we have to rally interest in the Democratic Party. And so I had the chance to come here. I thought, well, let's do it. And the fact of the matter is that Democrats haven't really been any better than Republicans on this issue. The proof of that is that the two people who were very quick to condemn Snowden as a traitor were Dick Cheney and Dianne Feinstein. Used the same word without any trial, without any investigation, hours into revelation. By the way, information that yet we have not seen one until of evidence that has harmed anyone or harmed national security, and everyone agrees it's provoked a national debate that is long overdue about privacy and secrecy, and without those revelations we would not be having the debate. And even in this group, they said earlier there was no vote for a privacy seminar. We are here thanks to the leakers, Assange and Manning and Snowden. I want to, I remember a point, it was just before 9/11, I did a cover story for Yahoo Internet Life. They had a magazine, and it was about privacy. And I did it because I was very involved with the internet and using devices. We set up, I used the first Stanford Moscow teleport. I reported, I went from Microsoft on a trip in Southeast Asia. I actually covered the coup in Cambodia. So I was aware of this new technology. And it hit me, as I wrote in that piece, that this new technology was sort of a dictator's wet dream, a Stalin or a Hitler. And I operated in totalitarian countries at different times. And what would you have? You had crude, you knew you were being followed, there would be some wiretapping, some attempt to get your papers. But in the main, it was very limited by today's standards. And what you have now is something that no dictator ever could imagine. We voluntarily give over enormous amount of information. Just to get to that Hilton Hotel, I had to tell 3 different services, yes, you can use my location. You can find out where I am. Let me surrender. Yes, I accept. And we all do it all the time. I edit an internet site, and I can tell you, without betraying, without placing cookies, I can learn a great deal about your reading habits, how long you stay on each column, where you email it, how you respond, and so forth and so on. So we live at a time where 3 things really have changed. One is we have this incredible pool of data. You don't have to be stationed outside someone's home. You don't have to be doing that kind of stuff. We voluntarily give it up. What books we read, what we download, and so forth, all of our habits. Secondly, we have these supercomputers that can do searches of this data. And they're very happy in the case of Boston. They can compare 20 million facial things and find out little differences in your eye and so forth. Boom, 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 boom. And in addition to having this revolution in information and being able to target people and know where they've been and who they've associated with and so forth, whether they're involved in an Arab Spring or they're people here in Orange County, we have the excuse, and that's something I want to address. And the excuse is we have terrorism. Terrorism. And terrorism trumps any other danger we've ever experienced. Right? That's the bit. I know you don't believe that, but that's the argument of Dianne Feinstein. They're saving the country. NSA is needed. We face an enemy we've never faced before. And that trumps any concern about civil liberties, our individual freedom, our privacy. Now, it's a bogus argument. And I just want to address that very quickly. First of all, I want to read the 4th Amendment. We tend to take it for granted. It's sweeping. And it was, as pointed out, it was a response to what the King did. It goes back to common law. And it's basically a very important notion, more basic than the First Amendment. It says if you don't have private space to stand on, to collect your thoughts, to mull over ideas, to send those letters that Washington and Jefferson and everybody said, to keep a diary, to make mistakes, to cross out things, without being observed by the state, whether it's the king, you don't have the basic ingredient for freedom, because you don't have the place, the incubator for free thought. It's absolutely critical, okay? And they enshrine this in the Fourth Amendment, so let me just read it to you. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Very specific. What was discussed here before is the vacuum cleaner. Every bit of data scooped up all over the world, unsuspecting, no guarantee of opting in or anything else, all available to be sifted through. It's the most fundamental violation of this guarantee. Now, where do we get the guarantee from? Oh, they say, well, those founders of our country, they didn't know about terrorism. Okay? That's the argument, okay? No one's lived in a time. It's a bogus argument because no people have ever been more secure than we in the United States at this time. No people have ever been more secure from foreign attacks, okay, from being put under the open dictator unless it's one we vote for. And if you think the condition of the founders, it's really amazing. These people were in a situation where, first of all, when they're making their revolution, maybe they only had 1/3 support, a real strong support, and another third might have been with the king, and another third might have been indifferent. And they knew it could go against them. And if it went against them, they knew every member of their family would be hung from some tree, and all of their property seized and everything else. So these founders of ours faced as great a personal risk as any people who ever wrote any enshrinement of any freedom. We should not take that away from them. And in putting these strong words down, they know it can come back to haunt them. They knew they were constructing a government in which they would be judged, and yet they put these absolutes in there. Free speech, free press. The other thing I would point out to the founders is they were very concerned about this appeal to patriotism. In George Washington's farewell address, which we had 8 years to develop, it was going to be one term, he was preparing it, he consulted with Madison and Jefferson and others. There are some strong words there about patriotism. And he said, beware of the impostures of pretended patriotism. And he warned against the foreign entanglements. And he made the basic argument, you cannot be a republic and an empire in the same moment. If you want to be a republic, you better tend to your own businesses. You better have governance over an area you can understand and control. When you move to empire, you go down Rome, France, Spain, England, all the examples they have. The two are in conflict. That's one reason, by the way, we have support for privacy and against the surveillance state on both sides of the aisle, and we have opposition and indifference. And that, I will say, and I'll probably get booed for saying it, but I respect the fact that Rand Paul has helped lead the fight on surveillance. I respect the fact that there is a libertarian support for this position. And it's a recognition this is not a left-right issue. It's a basic notion that you believe in governance of free people and their control over the society. Now I want to address, finally, because we want to have time for questions, I want to address this question of security, national security classifications over the post-9/11 hysteria. And I want to say, not being a lawyer, but being a journalist, I've had lifelong experience. Some of the stuff we did at Ramparts Magazine was the reason why you had the church investigation and stuff on the CIA into it. Any journalist who's honest, and that does not, unfortunately, not include all the talking heads on television, will tell you that well over 90% of what is called news coverage is dependent upon leaks when it comes to international relations, banking, main facts of commerce, and so forth. And almost all of that reporting comes out on a selective process where the people pushing one side of the debate, usually in government, usually in a position of power, leak information that has the stamp of classification, secret, privacy. And they are not punished. And I want to give just a few examples. If we look at, well, I'll give only 2 examples. on that side. I took a plane from, actually I was living here in Orange County, and I took a plane from John Wayne Airport up to San Jose, and I was on my way to Stanford, where I was a member of an arms control panel that had Condoleezza Rice, which was the other person, Sidrell and others, a number of people who were in the JACES. They had high security clearance. And I was on a plane. I was a reporter for the LA Times, certainly a suspect character, certainly known to be critical of weapon systems. And on that, after I got off the plane, I was getting off the plane, I ran into Edward Teller. Most of you seem to be old enough to remember Edward Teller. And Edward Teller said to me, where are you going? I was pretty good chat, and I knew him, I was friendly with him, I'd written about Livermore. And I said, oh, I'm going up to the arms control thing at Gallagher's house at Stanford. He said, make sure Sid tells you about the great results we got on the cottage test. Now, the cottage test was part of a number of tests named after cheeses that we weren't supposed to know that had to do with nuclear tests. And the cottage test was testing for the effect of lasing from a nuclear explosion. And it was behind the whole Reagan Star Wars notion that you could make a weapon that could zap everything. Okay? So Teller was basically referring to what was really the most important secret of our whole defense system. Okay? And he said, we got great results. Now, I'm not supposed to know the cottage test is a nuclear test. I'm not supposed to know it's about lasing. And I'm certainly not supposed to know they got great results. And if there was one piece of information the Soviets would have liked to have, it would be that. Okay? There was anything else you could possibly know. And Edward Teller was doing what Edward Teller always did. He was plugged into the government. He was plugged into the military-industrial complex. And he was making the case that he convinced Reagan on to go for Star Wars, you know, and not worry about screwing up any arms control agreements and so forth. So I got up to Galvez' house, and I see Sid Drell there, and he's got the highest clearance, being adjacent. And I said, hey, Sid, I just ran into Edward Teller down there at the airport, and he said they got great results on the cottage test. And Sid Drell turned white. He says, out. And we go outside for a walk, and he says, what the fuck are you talking about? You know, and I said, reasonable guy, I think he was from Brooklyn originally, and I tell him, Dad, he said, you go to jail forever. What are you doing? I can't talk about that. I mean, he was livid about it. Well, to my mind, it was typical of the way the information was leaked. If they had a weapon system they were pushing, they would give you details of those systems. On the other hand, if they were making a different argument, we talked about your uncle, who was the chancellor here at UC, Dr. Tien, and then became the chancellor of Berkeley, and I remember he was on the Committee of 100, which were Chinese, leading Chinese figures, came to the defense of a guy named Wen Ho Lee. I don't know if you remember the Wen Ho Lee case. Okay? Wen Ho Lee was a guy who was framed. All right? And they said he was a scientist in Los Alamos. They said, no, he's giving the greatest secrets in the world about the WA-40 warhead and miniaturization. These are really top secrets. And it turned out to be bogus. He was cut loose after 9 months in solitary. Those stories in the newspaper, in the New York Times, were based on leaks from a congressman here in Orange County, Christopher Cox. Okay? And they were based on secret data these people had seen, and they had leaked to the New York Times, and they were used to write these lurid stories about how this mysterious Chinese scientist, who, by the way, was from Taiwan, and he didn't even like the mainland. When he had a holiday, he went to Europe because he preferred classical opera to Chinese opera. It was his excuse. He was not political. I mean, the whole thing was outrageous. It was all based on documents of far higher secrecy than anything Snowden has seen that we know of. Okay, far higher. I'll give you one final example of the double standard. Okay, you had the Pentagon Papers. That's the most famous case before the current thing. And you had Daniel Ellsberg, right? And Daniel Ellsberg and Tony Russo wrote up here at the RAND Corporation. You had a study that was stamped secret. Why was it stamped secret, the Pentagon Papers? It was all stuff, as it turned out, when the Washington Post went to court and others, that you could have gotten in the public domain. It was damn secret because it was a study of history that McNamara had commissioned that turned out to be incredibly embarrassing to the government, both whether it's Republican or Democrat government. It contained the tissue of lies justifying our going to Vietnam. And it went through everything, everything. It wasn't that the enemy would learn something they didn't know. It wasn't about troop movements. No, it was about information that was embarrassing. Embarrassing, okay? And Daniel Ellsberg, who had been pro-war, had been over in Vietnam, a big gung-ho, was involved with this study, as with Tony Russo, and he read this material, and they said, this is information the American public has a right to have. That's the principle now that's involved with Manning, there's Julian Assange, and Snowden. And you look at any of that information as information we need in order to make decisions about how our money is spent and our role in the world, okay? And unfortunately, the Ellsberg-Pentagon case was thrown out not on a matter of principle of that we had the right, but rather because it turned out the judge had been offered a job by Richard Nixon as head of the FBI and entered the whole procedure. So we never even got clarity on that. But the basic principle here goes back to what George Washington talked about. If you want to be a republic of free people, you can't have your basic decision-making about war and peace decided on the basis of a classification system that one side of the debate has control over. That's what's going to happen as you happen with Iraq. You're going to be lied to. I'll give you one final example on this score. Because sometimes it's said, well, you can't really have these big secrets, and I've been that way going back to my grandpa's days. I've always been beating conspiracy people over the head, you know, and you couldn't really understand. I'll give you one final example. I was at the LA Times one day, and I had done a lot of freedom of information stuff and everything. I found out the Gulf of Tonkin, you know the Gulf of Tonkin. I finally got these documents that were being released, and I got them fast, that showed the Gulf of Tonkin, which was the excuse for our going into war, right? The second attack had never happened. And that our government knew in real time, before Johnson went on television, that it had not happened, or that there was certainly no evidence that it had happened, okay? And in fact, one of the Admiral Stockton, who ran with lost parole, he was a pilot. He flew above it that night. He went to bed. They woke him up. They said, we're attacking North Vietnam. He said, well, what for? And they said, because of the attack last night. I said, there was no attack. I was in my, that's in his book. Okay, but he was shot down. We never got that information. For 20 years, people kept that information from us. Hundreds knew that it never happened, okay? These documents came out, and I remember, I went downstairs and I talked to our publisher, Tom Johnson, who had been in the Johnson White House, and I said, we got these documents, and it looks like you guys all knew this was a lie. And he said, well, I didn't, but I said, I suspected it. He looked, I said, we have to publish it, to his credit. But here, he didn't even know, and he was right at Johnson's side. Again, justification for a war that could not be justified. So I want to conclude by saying, don't be fooled by the argument that national security requires the destruction of civil liberty and freedom, okay? The opposite is true. The founders put the protection of freedom in our Constitution because they thought it would make us stronger, not because they thought it was an indulgence when you have no problems. You have to understand that. We would be stronger had we not wasted all the resources and lives and killed 3.5 million people in Indochina. We would be stronger had we not gone to war in Iraq on a false basis, okay? We'd be stronger if we knew more about what we're going to do with all these weapons when we're producing, you know, spending more than the rest of the world combined, et cetera, et cetera. So the main argument to be made when you go out there and talk to other Democrats is to say, don't tell me we need to do this to be stronger. Lies make us weaker. Truth makes us